On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program Distinguished Professor of Anthropology and Geography at the Graduate Center of CUNY, author of many books, the latest, The 17 Contradictions and End of Capitalism, as well as 2 volumes on a companion to Marx, Rebel Cities, and others. David Harvey, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Professor, I want to start with some sort of more, I guess, more rudimentary things, and then work out from there. But tell us what you mean by contradictions of capitalism.
It's opposing forces that pull it in opposite directions, and the most obvious analogy of that would be that most of us have some tensions between having a decent personal life and our professional objectives. Usually we manage those tensions, but sometimes they heighten to the point where something has to give, and that's a major contradiction in most people's lives. But capital has similar kinds of contradictions like that, and there are quite a few of them, and therefore these contradictions give rise to a lot of instability in a capitalist society.
And they reveal themselves in those time of crises.
Yeah, no, I mean they become particularly obvious when crises break out, and we sometimes think that crises are accidents, but I think when we look at the history of capitalism, you'd have to say that they're actually functional for reorganizing capitalism, dealing with the contradictions in one way or another.
So let's talk about what you call. You talk about 3 classes of contradiction. One is foundational. What is a foundational contradiction of capital?
Well, for example, there's a lot of incentives for employers to try to keep wages down, and to the degree they're successful, of course, they can look forward to gaining higher profits. And as we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years, the share of wages in national income has tended to go down in the United States and in many other countries. The trouble is that if you do that, of course, then the problem is who is going to buy your product? And at that point, there's a difficulty of finding a market out there because you're reducing the wages systematically of working people. Most recently, we've tried to square that particular problem by introducing credit. So we end up with a society that's much more dependent now in terms of the market by using credit cards and having long-term credit. And as we've seen in 2008, at a certain point, that blows up because you can't sustain credit over and above what it is that people are earning for very long. And so there we get a crisis coming out of the fact that what's going on in terms of what individual capitalists do is not consistent with there being a robust consumer market.
And in some ways, I mean, you just described the past 80 years in this country.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem in the 1970s, in effect, was the other way around. The market was sort of okay. The problem was that workers were a bit too powerful and getting a bit too uppity, and so the share of wages in national income was fairly high, and so there was a systematic counterattack by what we call neoliberal policies, which included Reagan and Thatcher and Pinochet in Chile and all the rest of it, to try to reduce the power of working people, reduce the power of trade unions, reduce the power of left political parties, which allowed then capital to make higher profits from the gradual lowering of relative standards of the wage rate.
And so this was, I mean, so those 80 years we saw sort of the ebb and sway of sort of a a demand-side solution for this contradiction and a supply-side solution, and then I guess
that even came out theoretically. I mean, the theory that economists favored in the 1950s and 1960s was demand-side theory, which was associated with the name of Keynes. Then in the 1970s, we had a sort of a counter-revolution within the field of economics, and demand-side theory was thrown over for supply-side theory, and that led to the favored figure of Milton Friedman.
And I mean, so, from your perspective, when is the demand-side theory, which, I think, to the extent that I, as someone on the left, tend to sympathize with. Is that just simply unsustainable because of where it will necessarily lead in terms of a sort of a pushback by a supply side theory?
Well, there'll be a pushback, but also in itself, it tends to be unstable. So that the solution, if you like, by just pursuing demand-side solutions, by the time you get to the end of the 1960s, we start to find ourselves in difficulty. By the time you get into the 1970s, you get things like very high inflation rates, which are coming from sort of jacking up monetary demand without there being enough production to sort of respond to that demand. So the Keynesian demand side, while it favors ordinary working people in a certain way, also is unstable within the history of capitalism, and I think we're beginning to see that in China right now, which has been operating on a demand-side response to the crisis. And there are many people now who are kind of saying China is getting into real serious difficulties.
Will you also speak about the contradictions between the use and exchange value of a commodity? Will you explain that for us?
Yeah, well, you think of something like a house, and what do we use a house for in a country like the United States? Well, we need it for shelter, and we need it for all sorts of family living, and so we can define a set of use values that exist for a house, and all of us need those use values in order to live in a reasonable way. But then, of course, the house also has an exchange value, which means that in order to get a house, we have to lay out money to get it, and the more money we have, the better the house we can get. But the house itself is, of course, a form of value which stays in place, and so for many people, the house has been a form of saving. So people would have a long-term mortgage, and by the end of their life, they might end up owning a place, and then they can pass that on to their kids. But over the last 30 or 40 years, the house has also become a vehicle of speculation. So that the exchange value system is actually regulating our access to use values. And we are told, of course, that the best way to get the use values is to liberate the freedom of the market. But what we saw in 2008 or in 2007 was that system really blew up. And as a result of really excessive speculative activity on the exchange value side, where around 6 million people lost their use values in the house through foreclosures.
So let's also turn to the contradictions you speak about in terms of the tendency towards universal human alienation. I wanted to sort of bring us all up to around so much of this sort of comes to a head, at least, most recently in 2008. And I want to move into sort of wealth inequality, but I want to make sure that we touch on some of these other contradictions. So talk to us about the notion of universal human alienation.
Well, the tendency of capital is to develop technological trajectories that at a certain point devalue skill in work. Now, this is not the case for a small elite, but for the mass of the population, people get locked into pretty meaningless jobs and pretty frustrating jobs. And, what the poll numbers suggest is that about 70% of the people in the United States either hate their jobs or are completely indifferent to the job they do, which means that, taking pride in your job and the like is harder and harder because the kinds of jobs that are available to people are fairly meaningless. And I have to say, since I work a lot with young people, students and so on, more and more of them look at the job market and say, they're all meaningless jobs, and rather than do those meaningless jobs, they tend to, drop out and hope that they can found a rock band or something like that, which is, they can take some identity from. So alienation is a very serious problem, and to the degree that there was a time when even a steel worker, and you could kind of say a steel worker is sort of exploited in certain ways by capital, but on the other hand, the steel workers that I remember talking to had a certain pride in the job they did. They were tough people and strong people, and they kind of would brag about how good they were as workers. But you don't hear people in McDonald's or the people employed by Walmart kind of proudly talking about the nature of the job they do.
And in fact, there was a new report, I think, that came out just days ago that suggested the quality of jobs, and I guess it was measured more in terms of wages, but the number of low-wage jobs that were lost, far more have come back, and the reverse for higher-wage jobs, and I imagine that you could probably also assume, I think fairly, that the measure of pride, I guess, in those jobs too is very very low. Yeah, I mean, you also talk about the notion of accumulation of capital, so much so that it exceeds the ability to reinvest it in the economy. Explain that for us.
Yeah, well, what capitalists do, I mean, this is a sort of crude sort of definition of it. They start the day with a certain amount of money, and they go into the market, and they get hold of labor power, and they get hold of raw materials and machinery and all the rest of it, and they put it to work, and they make a commodity, and then they sell it at the end of the day, and they get more money at the end of the day than at the beginning of the day. So the system is based on a perpetual expansion. And it keeps on expanding and expanding, and this means that actually in the history of capitalism, it's been growing at a compound rate of growth of about 2.25% per year. Now, a compound rate of growth is a very peculiar thing. It goes very slowly at first, but then it accelerates and becomes very, very large and very quickly. And I think we're now at that point in the history of capitalism where there's nowhere else to go. I mean, China has been sort of almost colonized by capital now. Much of India and and Southeast Asia has been colonized by capital. Of course, the ex-Soviet bloc has come part of the capitalist system. So capital is now kind of really totally global, and it hasn't got much space to expand anymore. And yet it's trying to expand and it's like a very explosive force locked into a kind of a closed bottle, and pretty soon you see there's going to be some explosions around. And if you look at what's been happening to capital since the 1970s, there have been a lot of little explosions. Somewhere in the world, there's somewhere that's going under. And of course, in 2008, a lot of places suddenly went under. So I think we're going to likely to see more and more of that sort of explosive crises because capital can't expand beyond certain limits.
So, I mean, I guess the analogy is just almost if you take a snowball and roll it down a hill full of snow. I mean, in some ways, you're arguing that we're hitting the bottom of the hill in some ways.
Yeah, well, maybe not at the bottom of the hill, but we're about, 2/3 of the way down when the snowball starts to really gather a lot of things. There's a famous story about the guy who invented chess, and they asked for a grain of sand on the first one, and then double it on the second one. And of course, by the time you get to the 64th square, you're in astronomical numbers.
And so what is those explosions? I mean, what do they look like? I mean, was 2008 a function of that? I mean, and if so, how?
Yeah, well, I think well, there's many things that came together in 2008, but I think, for example, the problem in 2001 with the stock market crash and the end of the kind of dot-com economy then was you had all of this surplus money, and where was it going to go? Well, what Greenspan did was to keep the interest rate very, very low, and then people started to say, okay, we can deal with this problem by going into the housing market. So you get this huge asset bubble in the housing market in 2000 and so for 7 or 8 years, and many of us were saying, as early as 2003, 2004, this can't go on for very long. But it did, and then of course when the result was when it did crash, it crashed big time. If it had crashed in 2003, it wouldn't have been so bad. But by the time you get to 2008, there's an enormous amount of excess money sloshing around in housing markets, which is unsustainable.
And so, I mean, do you have a sense of where that money goes now?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, of course, the credit markets froze in 2007, 2008. The Federal Reserve tries to unfreeze them and then kind of says it hopes the banks will lend, but the banks have not been lending very much. Many private firms now are very profitable, but they're not expanding because they don't see the market there, which goes back to the lack of demand in the system. So in a sense, a lot of excess funds are just being tied up in cash reserves held by banks, corporations, even individuals. And again, this is not a very stable situation, except that to the degree the Federal Reserve has been pumping money into the market, you ask yourself, where has it gone? Well, it's mainly revived the stock market. That's been the big kind of beneficiary out of this. And, of course, when the stock market revives, certain people in society are very happy,
right.
But a lot of people are left aside. So the rich who have invested in the stock market are doing extremely well and have recovered from the crisis very, very well, but the mass of the population has done very badly.
And that sort of brings us to, I mean, I have been working my way through the Picketty book, and sort of because my children prevent me from reading for extended periods of time, also sort of slide off to reviews of the Picketty book and the way that the sort of people are interpreting it, and and so let's talk about what how your perspective on what Picketty is arguing in some way. I mean, he is for the most part, I mean, very clearly saying that there is something inherent in capitalism, that is that the rate of return, when it grows faster than the economy, I mean, sort of, I guess, crudely speaking, we get this tremendous wealth inequality, and ultimately, he's sort of saying this is not a bug, but a feature of capitalism. Is that
Yeah.
Is that your sense of it? And just I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, that's what he says. But first off, Piketty has not written a book about capital. For instance, you would have no idea from reading Piketty's book why 2007, 2008 happened. You'd have no idea of why crises get set up. You'd have no idea why we still have long-term unemployment increasing. So it's not a book about capital. What it's really a book about is the way in which capital can produce social inequality. And the basic thesis is seems to me is very simple, which is that the more you leave capital to the sort of untrammeled power of free markets with no state interventions and the like, the more you approach a free market model of society, the greater the level of social inequality. But he buries that political angle in a kind of mechanical thing of the rate of return on capital versus growth. But you have to ask yourself why the rate of return on capital is so high. And my argument to that would be to say, well, that has to do with the balance of class forces in a society, the ability of corporations and businesses and the like to suppress wages and repress wages and to actually enhance their profitability that way. If there was a massive social movement that prevented them from repressing wages in that way, then you would not have the effect that Piketty describes. So it's, actually I have a very simple way of looking at the same phenomena. What is really good about Piketty's book is that he produces a vast amount of statistical information, in effect to show that the way Marx interpreted how capitalism worked in Volume 1 of Capital is exactly right. And he didn't want to say that, of course, because he's very fearful of being described as a Marxist. And, of course, we know that the right wing right now is dubbing him as a Marxist in disguise. And so it becomes a rather complicated sort of political argument over reputations and all the rest of it.
I mean, it's interesting because there was, I was just reading one brief a blog post by Felix Salmon this morning, where he says that in some way that Piketty is very pessimistic in the sense that there is no way ultimately to. I mean, he offers, I guess, some solutions at the towards the end of the book that people are sort of, I guess, less impressed with, but there does seem to be ultimately a lack of addressing sort of the systemic that we're left with no solution to this. That this is almost sort of this is the way it is. To the extent that it wasn't this way was really a function of an anomaly that took place following the World Wars.
Well, I think he's, it's pessimistic in the sense that he just simply says at the end that you need a global wealth tax in order to equilibrate the situation. And if you don't have a global wealth tax, you're condemned forever to actually produce greater and greater levels of inequality. And and you kind of go, well, actually, if you paid more attention to some of the other contradictions of capitalism, you wouldn't make that argument because, like I said to you early on, the demand-supply differential is very, very important here, and if all the purchasing power gets located in this affluent oligarchy, then capitalism is going to be in a lot of deep trouble, and there are going to have to be adjustments anyway. So we go back to a sort of a Keynesian type model, which again has its own difficulties, but which is what China has been doing, for example. So I don't, I think he's set it up in such a way as to give only one possible answer, and I think there are actually a number of possible answers. But actually, I have grave doubts about the nature of the central thesis about the rate of return on capital. That is something that depends very much on how you measure capital, and of course we know that capital is measured speculatively. And if there's a collapse of speculative gains on say, housing or something like that, then the amount of capital in society is actually reduced remarkably through such crashes. And so the definition of capital is very sensitive to speculative movements and also to economic conditions.
Right, and I guess at least I want to talk about some of those other I guess answers here. Because from your perspective, even if we could get the global tax on wealth, that would not be enough because we would still have an unstable system.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously the levels of inequality we've now got are unsustainable in terms of having a balanced growth capitalist economy, and therefore they are a source of stress and a potential source of crisis formation. That would be my position. But that's not the only source of crises. And if you dealt with this one by redistributing wealth seriously, you would still have many of the other difficulties, like the relationship between supply and demand. You would still have the environmental difficulties. You would still have the difficulties of compounding growth and finding productive investments in a world which is already faced with tremendous surpluses of money, capital, looking for somewhere to go. So I don't think the redistributive angle that Piketty takes, even if it was followed through, it would not actually then stabilize capitalist society.
So, I mean, if so, in your version of his analysis, and had he included those other contradictions, where does that leave us? I mean, give us a sense of how of what that other solution that we don't really talk about in this conversation, or that is surrounded the all the talk of inequality. Let's talk a little bit about where we would start with that, with those other solutions.
Well, let me go back to one of the basic ones. I mean, would you rather live in a society which delivers adequate use values to the mass of the population, or do you want to live in a society which distributes use values unevenly and unequally, depending upon economic power and depending also on the capacity of individuals to extract vast fortunes from that exchange value system? In other words, I would like to see us move more towards making sure that housing is a human right and that everybody is provided with a decent house and a decent living environment, and the exchange value system, insofar as it can help do that, that's fine. But we've got to stop speculative activity in housing markets. We've got to actually stop the extraction of vast wealth by all of the mortgage financiers, the lawyers, the real estate lobbies, and all the rest of it. They're the ones who are benefiting from this exchange value system, and in many instances not producing affordable housing. For example, if you just take New York City, about 50% of the population of New York City is trying to live on less than $30,000 a year. If you take the idea that you should only spend a certain proportion of your money on housing, then 50% of the population of New York should be housed for less than $1,300 or $1,500 a month. Where can you find accommodation $1,500 a month in New York City? This is the kind of dilemma that we're in. In other words, the exchange value system is excluding half of the population from access to adequate housing. So, and I would make the same thing about education. Education should not be mediated by the exchange value system. It should be a human right, and it should be equally available to everybody. I think the same would be true of healthcare. What we have in this country is an increasing commodification, increasing monetization of the provision of all of these things. And does that benefit people or does that benefit capital? The answer is it benefits capital, and it benefits some people who become extremely rich by it. And then whether we get any decent housing, decent health care, or decent education, really is a byproduct of what they do. So I would argue to people, let's work on trying to make sure that housing, health care, and education, as a beginning point, are human rights, and it's the use value that needs to be provided to people, independent of all these exchange value considerations.
Do you see any? I mean, is there hope there that we are headed in that direction? I mean, there's certainly. I mean, I think Occupy on some level sort of introduced maybe those concepts anew in this country. In some ways, that has continued to resonate, in others not as much. But give me your sense as to how we sort of get there. I mean, because the I don't know if it's the irony, and maybe it is actually again a feature, not a bug of this crisis, but those who the capital is doing quite well. 5 years, 6 years out.
Capital has come out of this crisis extremely well, and the billionaires club has come out. It came out of the crisis 2009 and made more money in 2008 than it's ever made before. So some people have done extremely well out of the crisis. And again, you look at it and you kind of say, this is not a common sense world. I mean, the thing that strikes me was when I talk to people around saying, would you rather live in a place that provides adequate use values or sets up an exchange value system that makes the rich very rich? Then everybody says, well, we'd rather live in a society that provided adequate use values to everybody, and it's common sense. It's not hard. Now, bit by bit, what's happened particularly over the last 30 or 40 years is the exchange value side of things has got stronger and stronger and stronger. We're now increasingly dominated and to some degree victimized by a financial system that is highly predatory and parasitic. And to the degree that we're dominated by all of that, then I think people should really start to say we don't want to be dominated by that anymore. We want to create a society that actually delivers the goods in terms of a decent living standard to everybody and a decent living environment.
I mean, when you talk about exchange value, I mean, is saying, is describing our economy as becoming highly financialized synonymous in that way?
Yeah, no, it certainly has. I mean, in many countries of the world, for instance, education. My education was totally free in Britain back in the 1950s and 1960s. And it's just recently that governments there have started to introduce tuition fees and all the rest of it. I teach at an institution, City University of New York, that was tuition-free up until the 1970s. And then in the crisis of the 1970s, it was forced to start charging tuition. I think that higher education and access to higher education should be a free good. As it is, what we have now is debt-encumbered students, over $1 trillion of debt assembled amongst students who have to go deeply into debt in order to get their education. This seems to me scandalous. I mean, we shouldn't be going in that direction. The amount of student debt, say 20 or 30 years ago, was relatively small. Now it's become enormous. And this is a dead weight on a whole generation of the population. And it seems to me this is not a sensible way to go. And we should actually turn things around in the opposite direction and start to try to move towards a tuition-free higher education system, and certainly have tuition-free pre-university education.
And so, I mean, how does this happen? And we have, I guess it was a week or two ago, we saw another report by Martin Gilens, which was based on other work that he has done, which basically says that we are largely, and by we meaning those of us who are not billionaires, largely powerless in terms of the policy outcomes of our government in when we are at odds with the policy preferences of the very wealthy. I mean, what has to happen next?
Well, I think again the only thing that can really do something about this is a popular movement which turns the story around. I mean, of course, one of the big problems there is that from the 1970s onwards, the Supreme Court has kept on making decisions about, campaign finance is a question of freedom of speech, and that what we're giving the freedom of speech to is those who have spending dollars. So it's not freedom of speech; it's freedom to spend money on elections. And now we've gone to the ultimate extreme of that. So this is in my view, I would call this kind of legalized corruption of the political system. And how do we do something about that? Well, if enough people get outraged enough, and we move from what I call the sort of passive sense of alienation, where most people are actually alienated from the political process, and into an active, angry kind of mode of alienation, where people actually get out on the street and say, we need to change this system. We need to change it big time. We need to go back to the democratic roots of what this country is all about. We need to go back to the egalitarian roots of what this country is all about, and construct something which is radically different from what we have right now. Now, will that happen? I have no idea. But until people do that, then indeed Piketty is right to say, well, we're just going to have increasing inequality, and the rich are going to get richer, and the rest of us are going to be sort of basically becoming disposable populations.
Well, briefly, I mean, and I appreciate your hanging with me, but this week I was solicited by a professor who is a libertarian professor from Loyola, who because I enjoy, I guess, debating of sorts with libertarians, and and he's coming on. I mean, talk to me about the egalitarian roots of this country. I mean, because ultimately, a libertarian is going to say to me about the sort of the prominence of private property, and it all sort of emanates from there, I think. What do you say when you hear? How do you address libertarians? In other words, help me out a little bit. I mean, how do?
Yeah, right. No. I mean, there are some aspects of what the libertarians talk about, which I'm very sympathetic to, and it sounds to me like you are too.
Yes.
And the problem is that this association of individual freedom with private property. And the freedom to accumulate, and what does freedom mean? Does it mean freedom to exploit other people? Does it mean freedom to degrade the environment? Does it mean are those the kinds of freedoms we're talking about? Well, I think we have to kind of recognize that there are some things which are very positive in terms of freedoms and some things where some freedoms are actually counterproductive in terms of their social consequences, and the amassing of private wealth and privilege on the part of individuals is, I think, one of those aspects which becomes counterproductive. So when libertarians kind of say, well, we shouldn't do anything about the fact that, say, the leading hedge fund in New York each earned individually $3 billion each in a given year, that we shouldn't interfere with that. And you kind of go, well, that's not the kind of freedom that makes sense to me. To begin with, who produced all of that value which they're assembling, and how are they assembling it? Well, they're doing it through, all kinds of manipulations of financial markets and betting about things going crash and the like. So the libertarian position seems to me to have some problems because it's so associated with this idea of private property, and that therefore the freedom that they mostly seem to prize, particularly in economic theory, is the freedom of individuals to actually loot the public interest and to loot the public wealth and social wealth. Instead of kind of saying, well, to the degree that we've all contributed, or hope most of us have been contributing to the production of social wealth, we should all, I think, in an unalienated society, have some return for our contributions.
It seems to me they don't even believe that there should be a public wealth.
No. Well, no. Well, they don't think it should be, but it is. I mean, how are things produced? We actually rely on millions of people around the world to put breakfast on our table. I mean, libertarians would starve if all of those people were not actually working for them. So it's a social process every day that puts breakfast on people's table, and that involves sugarcane cutters in Dominican Republic. It involves the coffee producers in Kenya. And we are all highly interdependent, dependent upon each other. And then the question is, who is producing social value that we are daily consuming in our breakfast? I mean, if libertarians took it seriously and said, well, we should all be independent, then they should actually go out there and raise the bacon and the coffee and the sugar themselves. But they don't do that. This all comes from other people's social labor. But then what we find is the sugarcane cutter in Dominican Republic earns $2 a day, and the sugar that comes on the table to a hedge fund manager who earns $3 billion a year. This is where kind of the individual versus the social, I think, needs to be probed much more deeply.
Yes, I agree, and I've had similar conversations with them. They still feel like that sugarcane cutter, he has a right to sell his labor. He's done it for $2 a day, and that's just the way.
Yeah.
Bully for him. Too bad he wasn't, born the son of a hedge funder or what.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And that's generally where we end the conversation. And so I think there's also a good place for us to end ours. Professor David Harvey.
Okay.
The book is 17 Contradictions and the End of Capitalism. We'll put a link to it and your site on our at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I genuinely appreciate it.